Alright folks, welcome to this exciting video where you once again join me in the wild, abandoned landscape of Scotland. I've just finished that last episode up there at that abandoned hunting lodge there, and we're actually way to head to another ancient historical wonder, hidden here within these wild lands of Scotland at the foot of Glen Isla. And what we're about to see today is like an old abandoned farm, and I think it's still got remains of like an old mill. Check out folks, we like fences like that we can actually step over. Yeah, so this is some mad frosty conditions here, look at this. That's what we're dealing with for today's video. But it's almost like a pure paradise when you come out in a place like this. Literally just heading over the wild hill to document a little bit of forgotten history that's hardly seen. And I think I was here one time before with the channel DJ, but the sun was just proper setting. I remember that day we explored Glen Isla for ages looking for some abandoned history, and we were actually at the other side of the river and we could see this little abandoned farm down here, and like literally we had to walk about 10 mile all the way back up to my car and then come back down to this spot. And that's often how we find these abandoned places. Again, we're just often on other adventures or just out in the wilds, and you end up coming across like little historical wonders that's almost gone or like almost forgotten. And I'm just thinking, well, way to go, you can see these farm tracks here, farmers' tracks. So I'm just kind of heading this diagonal direction right now. So check this out here folks, this is incredible. Look at the old abandoned remains of this property, and this is the kind of thing I just love to document on the channel. It's like history of the land, it's almost forgotten. Some of these farms were the first crofters and the first people to shape the whole agricultural scene in these Scottish glens here. And it's cool just to see what historical wonders are left. And see this interesting thing here folks, this was actually the item which drove the barn mill. This is a cool first thing to look at. See on here, these would have all been bolted, and it's part of an apparatus which is turned here from either a horse, most likely a horse, but sometimes you could even put a cow or whatever on that would walk round and round, and that's what turned their mills back at that time. And the first time I visited here, I had no idea that's what that was. But it's cool to learn the history and then kind of share it over the years as I learn more about what I'm seeing. And it's cool to see that. The old mechanism history is just left there. You can imagine the noise of the old mill turning inside. Obviously I come with the greatest respects like landowners and building owners when I come to a place like this. So I'm no way to be like shifting gates to have a look in, but it's so interesting to see what history is just out here on the hill. Like the old farmhouse is over here, which is a cool detail. This would have been their shed at this side. Yeah, this would have been sheds all the way around here as well. And then the little farmhouse is at this corner. Wow, look at this folks, this frosty wilderness we're in. Look at the stones. Everything's just got that ice on it and that frost. And if you want to get an idea of how this is, you really have to go inside your freezer, sit in there and watch this episode folks, because it's proper freezing conditions right here. I'm just wanting to head on in to this area and look at the stone construction of this building. Yeah, so farms like this, they were actually updated and upgraded as the years went on. Doors like this would have been made bigger, so then they could be used with the latest of farm equipment, maybe like a tractor shed or whatever at one time. You can see how some of the original doors are bricked up. And then this must have been exactly where the mill was, which is so cool. The old mill would have been the latest in farming technology, and if farms didn't have like a water wheel or a source of water, this is the sort of system that they had. it was a mechanically driven system from an animal turning the wheel round and round. Here I can actually see a detail of the history here, folks. Look at this, this is what I love to see. This is what I was saying, look, here's the other side of that mechanical drive here. Check that out. Wow, look how ancient that is. And that's coming through that circle of metal that we saw outside with the 3 bars on it. And then you can imagine the big wheel here, the big gear. And you can see how it's proper old ironwork we're dealing with on this. And then look, the chap in these little bits to hold the outer piece onto the shaft. And there's probably some other interesting details of the history buried under the overgrowth outside. Wow, stuff like that makes it worth it, folks. Little details of the history like that to see how the mill had been driven. Obviously nowadays the combine harvester itself does all those jobs. Back at that time they had to bring their crop to places like to the farm or whatever, wherever the mill was. Whereas now the mill's kind of like built in, but often these mills were also kind of like bruising the grain, whereas a bruiser nowadays is obviously a separately driven machine as well. Most items like that are just, obviously nobody's using that sort of thing now, powered from a cow or a horse, and it's just crazy to think how the times have changed, and the relics of that are still on the land to be seen. Look at this detail here, folks. Look at this old wooden lintel, one of the last remaining pieces of this. Just look at it right there. Crazy. It's just almost rotted away. And look at this house here, look at the character of this. Absolutely insane. Such a beautiful landscape. The winter's often the best time to come and see things like this, because you can actually see all the layers of the history. It's no covered up for the vegetation. See, the wall's so thin here, and it's likely that there's a fire behind this corner wall, because often that would ruin the strength of the stones. Wow, yeah, look at this. There's a cow feeder or a sheep feeder at the door, but I should be able to get in around it. And look at this, the way it's built. It's had the render on it. Look at the old metal windows. They used to be fitted to a lot of like farmhouses and all sorts of houses back in the day. Probably that wasn't the original windows in this property though when it was first built. It probably had some other like little wooden framed windows for sure, with like the wooden shutters. Yeah, I can't even see this end now. I was theorising there was a fire. Look at this wee window. Wow, see the character of that, folks. I just love documenting it for the world to see. Things like that's just out here. I think the person standing at this window maybe pondering their day's work, looking out over the field at their animals grazing, and then one day a place like this was just abandoned. All the goings on, the hustle and bustle, it just went silent. And from that day to this, it's just slowly decaying, and this is what's left. Each day and night, more stones and bricks get eroded away with the wild weather and probably the animals that call this home now and again. Look at this, the grand fire at this end, which would have been where they would have probably cooked their meals and spent most of their time in this room. And there would have been a grand fire, which is still there. Look at this, folks. Wow. Look, there's the top of the big fire. Think of the heat. That must have generated some heat. That's been a proper decent big fire. And look above it, it's got the metal loops on the lintel. And it's even got like the metal plate above for the heat. You see the original colour with the white paint and the old cement render which is in there. But you can also see this has probably not been the original fire. This would have been upgraded and updated potentially, because I think the original fire in here has been a far more ancient construction, judging from that lintel stone there. And look at this little side room here. This is interesting, folks. Oh look, the wee sink's still in this. So this has probably been like a wee wash house, or maybe a house where they would have, like a wee room where they would have been doing the washing or whatever back in the day. Because that's often how it was for the houses. They would have maybe like boiling water or whatever, and the sink would have been through. Because I think the toilet facilities were all outside in like an outhouse. You see where I'm standing now? This would have been the roof height. Kind of, I would have had to be like this. So also it was likely to have been a bit of a larder in a storeroom maybe in here. Because if you were standing up in this room, you would have to always be at this side. But then I suppose I'm not considering how high the floor may have been. Look at the old sink, folks. I think you call that a butler's sink. Wow, this old farm here. This old farm here predates the old hunting lodge that you may have seen in the last video. And it's cool to see the details of the history, how they've been changed and updated and upgraded over the years. Look at that, the pane of glass is still in the window. One last remaining bit of glass to tell the story of this house. Check out this as well. The little sink area, it must have been added on. Okay, what this must have been, folks, when bathrooms and things got introduced to houses, this would have all been built on at that time. On the side of the existing house. Oh, there's been a mirror. A rounded mirror. And the wee sink, look. Forgotten and lost to nature and time, folks. Now look, they've got a separate tap there. I wonder if there's been a bath or something in this area. Wow, look at this here. Nowadays it's a nest for animals, but look at the old toilet. Wow, I need to document that. St. Mounds it says on there. And look, it's got the old pool chain for flushing it. Wow, that's so cool to see the character of that wee window and stuff even. Yeah, this bathroom toilet's been added on to the house. That's how I can tell that other wash house bit is not been a toilet. Oh, in here there's been like a shower. Look at the whole system. Look at that, that's crazy. The two old taps. And look at this detail. The old tank still hanging in there, folks. It's just an incredible landscape we're in once again. Wow, I've just loved seeing this. This is the kind of wee adventure. I just love throwing the camera on and heading into the wilds. If there's a wee bit of abandoned history like this house, it's just amazing to document before it's done and gone. Look how fragile these rocks are perched here. Look at that, folks. That rock's just holding on by a miracle. And look, granite lintels just balancing. Think of the view out this window. Maybe a gate out into the field straight ahead there. And think about the animals getting drove into the yard. Maybe into the sheds for the winter. For these conditions, folks, often the farmers will be bringing their animals in, especially in these glens where the conditions get super freezing. And look, this is the old front door, broken apart and busted with the wild weather and probably sheep and stuff jumping in. Now look at this here, the last remains of where the door frame had been mounted. There is actually a current house at the far side here, folks, so I'm obviously keeping my voice kind of low. Look, I can see how the house has been painted. Look, there's the colour of the paint. Almost like a whitewash kind of colour, which is all flaked off now. But it looks like it's been right over the whole walls. Yeah, there's some better remains of that history here. Look at it, whitewashed. And I'm thinking, at that time, I'm not sure when it was, 1800s I think, when this, or early 1900s, when this was built on, then that's when these windows would have been put in. And it may even have been around the time of the 1920s or whatever that those final modifications were done to this farmhouse. Maybe by that time it was no longer a farmhouse but just a house. The construction of this end bit is quite crude though, I must say. Look at this original old boundary line here, which must have been the old farmhouse garden. It's so interesting, folks. Look at the old window. That's the character of the land and these houses that it's just amazing to see. Think about the folk looking out that wee window, maybe out to sea in the morning if it was snowing, or what the conditions were before they go to do their day's work. And then there's been something out here, maybe troughs, or who would even know what it would be. There's taps there. Maybe that was for water in the farmhouse garden. The farmer's wife was maybe out there with a pail of water, watering the rows of tatties or the leeks, onions, whatever it was they were growing. They would have the bowl of stovies probably cooking on top of that Rayburn or whatever type of fire it has. It's like a big cooking stove that they've got, and it must have put out so much heat, and most likely it would have heated their water as well at that time. Check out this big stone here at the door of the farmhouse. Look, it's got the 3 holes in the side of it, but look, that's an interesting detail. See what I have seen with old houses, it's got the thatched roofs. Here, this is the detail here that I've just noticed, folks. Originally, this house must have had like a thatched type of roof, often even using heather and stuff off the hill, and it would be lashed over the top with big rope to these. And there's one there. And then look at this here. Here's the other one. I thought this was just a rock when I first saw it. Look, I believe that's what this potentially is. There must have been a hook on this end. What a crazy detail of history that could potentially be. Sometimes when I'm exploring, I put out theories of the history, and often if I'm not sure, I just like to record stuff like that anyway, just so you can see what it is and where it is. And sometimes you can put together the pieces of the puzzle and then you realise what history you're looking at after you've done a full explore of a place. I was just coming around here to see if there was any other evidence of more of those stones lying, but you never know if they'd been like repurposed or taken away for a different job as the farm kind of went on. Look at this down here, I didn't even notice this on the way in. Look at this piece of apparatus here, folks. That's like a motor on there, turning this. Whatever this thing is here. It's maybe a bit of the old equipment out of the house way back in the day. Wow, it's frozen to the ground. Yeah, and this must have been their sheds along here. Oh, look, there's parts of the old electrical wires, so that could even be a box related to that. And look, this must have been where they had like a feeding trough or a water trough for the animals in here. You can see the way the stones are built, folks. It's little eens and big eens and round little pebbles, and it's just magic to see how that can stand up for so many years. It stands the test of time. Wow, look at that there. There's obviously still agriculture goes on here in a big way, and farming's obviously a key part of this glen. It is amazing to see how it's progressed from the times of that little mill where the shaft's been coming in through the wall, and then you consider nowadays the big size of the new combines and how all that can just be built into one machine. See, originally as well, it's like there's maybe been more built on the outside, because look at the way that's built with the stones sticking out. It's almost like it's been longer. You can see how they would have been throwing the straw and the wheat up into there, and then probably throwing it down into the mill, which would be below. A lot of the mills you would throw it in for the top, and then yeah, that went on in a big, that was like at every farm they had some sort of mill. And like I say, if it wasn't a water wheel or a water source, it's more likely to be what we see here. Boy, this cool old system. And this, at the time, would have been the latest in farming technology. Every farm I've been to though, there's none of these left. And this is the first time I've seen so much of it sticking up out the grass. You have to imagine these 3 rods. There was probably a 4th one here, and they would have all been connected in the middle. And then the animal would have just been turning that and turning that. It would have been a fair system. They would have dug out this whole area, and imagine it when it was well kept. On old farm buildings you often see that it's got a round, like part of it will be round on the side. There'll be a round part of the building basically. And that was where these systems were. And you see it on a lot of Scottish farms. Anyway, let's keep this adventure going. What a crazy little abandoned historical wonder, and I forgot how cool it was. And I've just loved today's adventure, heading into lands like this. At this time of year, that's about as high as the sun gets in the sky, and it makes for a super cold condition. So sometimes when I'm recording these videos, my hand gets super frozen because I'm always like holding the camera up, or when I'm looking at some abandoned history, you just can't describe how freezing cold everything is. Once you're like climbing over gates and stuff, the metal's just so cold. Yesterday when I was exploring, I went back to my car up Glen Clova and the door handle was like frozen shut. It's just unreal, the conditions and the temperatures. But it is still amazing to be out exploring and paying adventures in these conditions. And just look at that grand view, looking up towards the top of Glen Isla and all the way on up to the hills of Glen Shee in the distance. Check out the way the ice forms on the blades of grass, folks. It's just special to see. Kind of almost just looks like crystals, and when you're walking on that, it's just so weird. It crunches, and areas that's normally super muddy, you can just walk right over. It's just rock solid. A lot of these lands here were created for the glaciation period. Again, this is all the deposits at the lower glens and the lower lands of the lower glens. And then the river down at the bottom of this hill here is the River Isla, which flows right down Glen Isla. And yeah, there'll be areas potentially on it freezing over this year with the mad cold conditions. So I was just looking at the lie of the land here in the field, and I'm just theorising this could have been the old original access road to that farm we just looked at. I'm kind of in the middle of the field, and you can see there's an ancient dike line leads in down from the main road, and then there's this levelled part which is higher than the field. You can see it here, it's proper landscaped, leading down into that hollow where I've just come from. So it is interesting to see that, because obviously it's all just wild grazed field now. But for sure you can see this rise here in the land, and then this ridge going towards the gate. Some of the stones here in the walls and in the dikes, look at the size of them. They're like standing stones in their own right. Check out that old padlock, folks, on the gate. I was just noticing this big metal gate matches the one that's at the old hunting lodge further up the road. So I'm not sure if back in the 1920s that house from the old croft was maybe taken on from the same people that built the old hunting lodge, but who would even know that history? It's only been like a year since I even knew that little farm existed, and it's so cool to go down there and see what little historical remains are within the wild grass and the old forgotten mill systems of times gone by, powered from an animal. Well, that's how you know we're just fresh out the Stone Age, folks. And I'm just keeping it safe because this road can be super busy. Even though it's like minus whatever, -3, and everybody's just still out as normal on their day-to-day, like driving about. And just check this out, I'm always just breathtaking sometimes when I look around, see where I am. So lucky to have this on my doorstep to explore and to have the history hidden within it, folks. We just love it on the channel. Anyway, I'm just about back at my car, so I'm going to end this video here. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back soon with the next adventure, wherever I end up going.